You're digging. Your hands are raw, blistering in the cold autumn air. Around you, 40,000 legionaries shovel earth, drag timber, pile stone building walls that stretch farther than the eye can see. Behind you lies a fortified city on a hill, packed with 80,000 enemy warriors who could storm out at any moment. Ahead of you, somewhere beyond the horizon, 250,000 reinforcements are marching to crush you, and you're building walls facing both directions. Inward, to trap the enemy; outward, to hold back the coming storm. Your general has just made a decision that defies all logic. He's walling his own army inside the battlefield, trapped between two massive forces, with no escape route, no reinforcements, no room for retreat. If this gamble fails, everyone dies. But if it works, if these walls hold, the entire world changes. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from, because it's incredible to imagine how a single decision made on a quiet French hillside more than 2,000 years ago still echoes loudly enough to pull all of us together here today. It's almost surreal to think that one moment, one choice carved into the flow of history continues to captivate us, making us lean in, wondering how anyone could have survived what followed. That ancient crossroads, born in a world far harsher than ours, still grips our curiosity and reminds us how fragile, unpredictable, and astonishing the human story can be. The place is Alesia, a fortified Gallic stronghold atop Mount Auxerrois in what is now Burgundy, France. The year is 52 BC. The man orchestrating this madness is Gaius Julius Caesar, and he's in the middle of a war that will either cement Rome's dominance over Gaul or end his career in catastrophic failure. For 6 years, Caesar has been campaigning across Gaul, modern-day France, Belgium, parts of Germany, and Switzerland, conquering tribe after tribe, pushing Roman authority into territories that had never bowed to anyone. But Gaul is not defeated. It's angry. And in 52 BC, that anger found a leader. His name was Vercingetorix. Young, charismatic, tactically brilliant, he united dozens of Gallic tribes under a single banner, something Rome had never seen before. Instead of meeting Caesar in open battle, where Roman discipline would crush them, Vercingetorix employed scorched earth tactics, burning villages, destroying supplies, forcing the legions to march through empty, hostile country where every mile drained their strength. It was working. Caesar's army was stretched thin, demoralized, starving. Then Vercingetorix made a decision. After months of guerrilla warfare, he pulled his forces back to Alesia, a naturally fortified position on a plateau surrounded by rivers and steep valleys. He had 80,000 warriors inside those walls, and he knew a massive relief force, estimated at 250,000 fighters from tribes across Gaul, was marching to his aid. The plan was simple: hold out until reinforcements arrived, then crush Caesar between two armies. It should have worked. On paper, it was unbeatable. But Caesar didn't retreat. He didn't try to storm the fortress. Instead, he did something that seemed insane. He decided to besiege the besiegers. He would surround Alesia with walls so strong that Vercingetorix couldn't break out. And then, knowing the relief army was coming, he would build a second ring of walls facing outward to hold them off. He was going to trap himself deliberately between two enormous forces and bet everything on Roman engineering and discipline. If the walls failed, there was no fallback plan, no escape, just annihilation. The construction began immediately. Caesar's engineers laid out a circumvallation, an inner ring of fortifications encircling Alesia, roughly 11 miles in length. Every detail was calculated. First came a trench, 15 feet wide, filled with water diverted from nearby rivers to prevent anyone from crossing. Then another trench, also 15 feet wide, this one dry but lined with sharpened stakes. Behind that, a rampart 12 feet high, topped with a wooden palisade and punctuated by towers every 80 feet watchtowers, where Roman soldiers could rain down javelins and arrows on anyone trying to break through. But Caesar didn't stop there. He knew Vercingetorix would try to break out, so he added layers of traps. Rows of sharpened stakes hidden in shallow pits, disguised with brush, what the Romans called cippi. Iron hooks embedded in wooden logs, buried just beneath the surface stimuli, and 5 rows of tree trunks sharpened to points, angled outward like a forest of spears, what the soldiers grimly nicknamed scurvy deer. Anyone charging those defenses would be funneled into killing zones, impaled, trapped, slaughtered before they even reached the walls. And then, because surrounding an enemy army wasn't audacious enough, Caesar ordered the construction of a second ring, the contravallation, an outer wall facing away from Alesia, designed to hold back the relief force. Another 14 miles of fortifications, more trenches, more stakes, more towers. All built while soldiers kept one eye on the hill, waiting for Vercingetorix to attack, and the other on the horizon, watching for the dust clouds that would signal the arrival of 250,000 Gauls. The legionaries worked without rest. Timber had to be hauled from forests miles away. Stone was quarried and dragged into position. Earthworks were piled by hand, one shovelful at a time, and all of it happened under constant threat. Gallic raiding parties harassed the work crews. Skirmishes erupted along the lines. Men died, building the very walls that were supposed to protect them. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix watched the walls rise and understood what Caesar was doing. He sent out his cavalry, thousands of mounted warriors, to break through before the ring closed. It was his last chance to keep a line of communication open to coordinate with the relief army. The cavalry charged. They hit the Roman lines at multiple points, trying to overwhelm the defenses before they were complete. But Caesar's German auxiliary cavalry mercenaries, loyal to Rome, met them head-on. The fighting was brutal, chaotic, a swirling melee of horses, swords, and screaming men. The Gauls were fierce, but the Roman discipline held. The cavalry assault failed. The survivors retreated back into Alesia. The trap was closing, and then the walls were finished. 2 concentric rings of fortifications, enclosing Caesar's army like a prison of their own making. 40,000 Roman soldiers trapped between 80,000 warriors in the city, and 250,000 more marching toward them. The soldiers manning those walls must have felt it, the suffocating realization that they were committed now, irrevocably, to a fight they couldn't run from. There was no supply line stretching back to Roman territory, no reinforcements coming to save them, just the walls, the trenches, the stakes, and the knowledge that if either line broke, everyone inside would die. Inside Alesia, conditions were deteriorating rapidly. Vercingetorix had stockpiled supplies before the siege began, but he hadn't planned on feeding 80,000 people for weeks. The grain ran out. Then the livestock desperation set in. Vercingetorix made a decision that still haunts the historical record. He expelled all the non-combatants from the city, women, children, the elderly, hoping Caesar would let them pass through his lines. It was a calculated gamble. Fewer mouths to feed meant the warriors could hold out longer, but it was also a test. Would Caesar, who claimed to bring Roman civilization and order, show mercy to unarmed civilians? Caesar refused to let them through. The expelled Gauls, thousands of them, were trapped in the no man's land between the city walls and the Roman fortifications. They begged, they screamed, They starved in full view of both armies. Some Roman soldiers, horrified, tried to give them food, but Caesar's orders were clear: no one passes. To let them through would be to feed the city by proxy, extending the siege indefinitely. So they died there, slowly, between the two walls. It was a decision that reveals something essential about Caesar: his capacity for absolute pragmatism, for making choices that were strategically sound and morally monstrous. The Gauls on the ramparts of Alesia watched their families starve. The Romans on the walls watched too, and some of them must have wondered what kind of victory they were building. Then the relief army arrived. The dust cloud appeared on the horizon, and the rumble of 250,000 warriors marching in formation echoed across the valley. It was the largest coalition force Gaul had ever assembled, tribes that had fought each other for generations, now united against Rome. They encamped just beyond the Roman outer walls, and for the first time, Caesar's soldiers could see the full scale of what they were facing. They were outnumbered 6-1, and they were trapped in the middle. The first assault came at night. Vercingetorix, coordinated with the relief force fires lit on the hilltop, signaled the attack. The Gauls inside Alesia surged out, filling the ditches with bundles of sticks and earth, trying to breach the inner wall. At the same moment, the relief army charged the outer defenses. Caesar's legions were hit from both sides. The darkness was filled with the sound of rams battering gates, ladders slamming against walls, men screaming as they fell into hidden pits lined with iron spikes. The Roman soldiers fought in shifts, sprinting from one wall to the other wherever the pressure was greatest. Javelins flew. Stones hurled from slings cracked skulls. The fighting lasted through the night, and when dawn broke, both Gallic assaults had been repulsed. Barely. The second assault came days later. This time, the Gauls targeted a weak point in the Roman lines, a section where the terrain made it impossible to dig proper trenches. The relief force concentrated 60,000 warriors on that single stretch of wall. They came in waves, relentless, absorbing Roman arrows and javelins, climbing over the bodies of the fallen to reach the ramparts. The defenses began to buckle. Centurions shouted for reinforcements. Soldiers who had been holding the inner wall sprinted across the camp to plug the breach. Caesar himself rode along the lines, his scarlet general's cloak unmistakable, rallying the troops. The fighting was so close, so desperate, that men were using their bare hands grappling on top of the walls, dragging each other down into the chaos below. And then Caesar did something unexpected. He sent his German cavalry on a wide flanking maneuver, circling around the outside of his own fortifications to hit the Gallic relief force from behind. It was a gamble, stripping defenders from other sections of the wall, but it worked. The German horsemen crashed into the rear of the Gallic assault, and the attack collapsed into confusion. The Gauls retreated, leaving thousands dead in the ditches. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix knew time was running out. His warriors were starving. The relief force had failed twice. One more attempt this time, coordinated, overwhelming. Everything thrown at the weakest point in Caesar's defenses simultaneously. The final assault began at dawn. Vercingetorix led his forces out personally, 80,000 warriors pouring down the slopes of Alesia, while the relief army launched a massive attack on the opposite side. Caesar's soldiers, exhausted, depleted, were hit with the full fury of Gaul. The fighting raged for hours. Sections of the Roman wall were breached. Gauls fought their way inside the fortifications. For a moment, it looked like the defenses would collapse entirely. Caesar saw it happening. He grabbed a reserve cohort, his last mobile unit, and led them directly into the breach. Ancient sources describe him fighting in the front lines, something Roman generals rarely did, because the sight of his red cloak was the only thing holding the line together. The soldiers around him fought not because they thought they could win, but because their general was standing next to them, refusing to retreat. At the same time, Caesar ordered Mark Antony, yes, that Mark Antony, future rival of Octavian, to take the cavalry on another flanking attack, this time targeting Vercingetorix's forces on the slopes of Alesia. The cavalry charged. The Gauls, caught between the walls and the horsemen, broke. Vercingetorix's warriors retreated back into the city. The relief force, seeing the assault fail, began to disintegrate. Tribal leaders argued, units withdrew. By nightfall, the coalition was collapsing. The next morning, the gates of Alesia opened. Vercingetorix rode out alone. The sources say he wore his finest armor, polished and gleaming, and rode slowly toward the Roman camp. He dismounted in front of Caesar, removed his weapons, and knelt. Some accounts say he spoke. Others say he simply sat in silence, waiting for Caesar to decide his fate. It was a gesture of surrender, but also a final act of defiance, offering himself to save his people from complete annihilation. Caesar accepted the surrender. The siege was over. The aftermath was brutal. The Gauls who survived were sold into slavery, tens of thousands of men, women, and children, distributed among the legions as spoils of war. Vercingetorix was taken to Rome in chains, paraded through the streets during Caesar's triumph years later, and then executed in the Tullianum, the underground prison where Rome disposed of its enemies. The coalition that had nearly defeated Caesar shattered into fragments. Gaul would never unite like that again. Within a year, the conquest was complete. For Caesar, Alesia was the turning point. It proved he could win against impossible odds, that his engineering, his tactical genius, and his willingness to gamble everything could overcome even the largest armies. The Senate in Rome was terrified. A general who could do this, who could trap himself between two armies and emerge victorious, was a man who could do anything. Within a decade, Caesar would cross the Rubicon, ignite a civil war, and transform the Roman Republic into an empire. Alesia was the moment that made all of it possible. There's a detail from the archaeological excavations that stayed with me. When French archaeologists uncovered the remains of Caesar's fortifications in the 19th century, they found the ditches still there, the post holes from the towers, the layers of iron hooks and sharpened stakes buried in the earth. And they found something else. The bones of horses and men tangled together in the defensive trenches, exactly where the ancient sources said they fell. The walls worked, the traps worked, the audacity worked, and the price was written in the ground itself. The walls themselves have long since vanished, swallowed by fields, forests, and the quiet patience of time. Yet their presence lingers unmistakably subtle depressions in the earth, faint ridges carved into the hillside, the ghostly geometry of a siege that once reshaped the fate of nations. 40,000 men dug those lines, cutting their will into the soil, and though the stones are gone, the story they wrote remains embedded in the land like a memory that refuses to fade. Today, visitors walk that ancient perimeter, following the curve of fortifications that once enclosed desperation, ambition, and defiance. Step into the right clearing on Mount Oxoas, and the entire design reveals itself at once, a vast ring encircling the hilltop. The echo of an audacious gamble, visible even after centuries, from that vantage You can almost feel the tension that once electrified this ground to walls, facing inward and outward. Two armies, one besieged and one waiting, and one impossible choice that defied all conventional logic. It becomes clear, standing there, that some moments in history are born not from safety, but from daring. Sometimes the only way to move forward is to seal every exit, commit to the impossible, and challenge the world itself to break your resolve.